Hello and welcome. You're watching France 24. Coming up, Paris strongly denies hitting a wedding party in central Mali, this while targeting insurgents back in January. A leaked UN investigation concludes a French airstrike killed 19 civilians. Sicily's top health official resigns, but Ruggero Razza denies doctoring COVID numbers so the region could avoid red zone restrictions. Meanwhile, Italy's ordered 5-day quarantines for all returning passengers eyeing an Easter getaway abroad. Sporadic fighting reported in the Mozambique coastal town overrun last week by a jihadist insurgency. Displaced civilians could number in the tens of thousands. Portugal announces the dispatch of some 60 military advisors to assist the government. In the next hour, the France 24 debate, can Myanmar's junta simply shoot its way out of the crisis? After Saturday's killing of 141, and security forces even firing on funerals. What response? We'll ask about international sanctions, but also pro-democracy demonstrators. So far, they've overwhelmingly been nonviolent. But now, longtime ethnic insurgencies are getting drawn in. What next? Tell us on Facebook and Twitter, #F24debate. Hello everyone, I'm François Picard. The French Ministry of Defense has flatly denied the accusation ever since January. Now it's an unpublished UN report that accuses an airstrike of killing 19 civilians near the remote village of Bonti in central Mali. Residents there speak of an attack hitting a wedding party. Paris insists that only militants of a group affiliated with Al-Qaeda were targeted. The French also expressing, quote, numerous reservations about the methodology used in the investigation by MINUSMA, the United Nations force in Mali. Well, for more, let's turn to Niagalé Bagayoko, head of the Africa Security Sector Network. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24. Yes, I can hear you. Niagalé, of course, we haven't read the report. We're only basing ourselves on these findings that were shown to reporters. Your thoughts on this latest chapter?
Yes, I think it is a major development, in fact, because this report was really expected by a lot of stakeholders. And what is made clear in this document is that, in fact, there were both civilians and jihadi combatants. But what is demonstrating is that there was definitely a wedding, and a wedding in a jihadi environment is, of course, nothing which can be compared to what we can expect from such an event in a Western environment. And what is put forward in the report is that, in fact, 19% were civilians, and only 3 among those killed were jihadi combatants.
Your reaction to the French Defense Ministry questioning the methodology, saying that eyewitnesses gave conflicting accounts?
Absolutely, it is a key question because, in fact, the rules of engagement of Operation Barkhane are not made public. So we don't know exactly what is the process which is used, but French ministry is definitely considering that all the process for the rule of engagement has been respected in terms of humanitarian law and law of armed conflict. But on the other hand, you have the methodology of the UN report, which is based on testimony from local populations. And I think it is also very important to hear from them. And that is the reason why some organizations, Human Rights Watch, for instance, are calling for 2 other independent inquiries, one from the French themselves and one from the Malian military, because all this operation has been there are video of what happened exactly, but it's still confidential. and the French Ministry of Defense consider it does not have to make it public, even to the parliament.
The French who, back in 2013, helped chase insurgents who were marching southwards. They were hailed as heroes at the time. Now it's been 8 years. We've had numerous summits where the French have talked about trying to find the exit door from being too bogged down for too long. What next?
In fact, what was decided after the Ndjamena summit, which was held in mid-February, was to have also a civilian surge, which is in fact the civilian counterpart of the military surge, which was decided 1 year before. And this can show how the environment is getting more and more tricky, more and more complicated to deal with. And we also can see that growingly head of states from Sahel countries, first in Mali, then in Burkina Faso, and now in Niger, because there has been on your channel an interview from Mohamed Bazoum, a new Niger president, making clear that the approach is not working and that there is also a need to have a more broader and inclusive approach, not only based on military instruments.
Niagalé Bagayoko of the Africa Security Sector Network, thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thanks to you.
The findings of a long-delayed World Health Organization fact-finding mission to Wuhan, China, offer no proof that COVID started in a lab. But the head of the WHO also criticizes China for not offering access to data. Tedros Adhanom, nonetheless, calling on investigators to delve deeper into that theory about a possible lab leak incident.
We looked at the different hypotheses, among others, the lab incident possibility, because that was the assessment that it was not something where we could see strong indication that that was something we should look into. And therefore, it was ranked as the least likely, so to speak, of the four possible pathways. Not saying that it was impossible, but not the one we would start initially going deeper into.
No one's vaccinated until everyone's vaccinated. That mantra has been put forth oftentimes over this past year. Now, more than 20 world leaders have signed a pledge to cooperate in the future to thwart further pandemics.
From European leaders like Boris Johnson, Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, to African heads of state such as Cyril Ramaphosa and Macky Sall, to Chilean, Indonesian and South Korean leaders. In all, 24 heads of state signed this editorial published across the international press in a collective call for a shared global response to future pandemics.
There will be other pandemics and other major health emergencies. No single government or multilateral agency can address this threat alone.
The leaders are rallying behind a proposal made by President of the European Council Charles Michel last December at the UN Special General Assembly. He presented the initiative this Tuesday at a joint meeting with WHO officials.
It has taught us one brutal lesson. No country, no continent can defeat a pandemic alone. It requires a global approach, the us rather than the me, and a collective commitment at the highest political level.
The agreement would be rooted in the UN Health Agency's constitution.
The pandemic has also thrived amid the inequalities in our societies. It has exposed the gaps in national, regional, and global preparedness and response systems, but also allowed us to identify opportunities to strengthen the international health architecture. The time to act is now.
Formal negotiations on the finer details of the agreement haven't yet begun between participating states. The leaders of the world's biggest powers, the US, China, Russia, or countries such as India and Brazil, didn't sign the statement.
As Paris area's hospitals run at full or near full capacity. The latest spike in COVID cases putting the government under pressure. French President Emmanuel Macron could be the one addressing the nation Thursday after Wednesday's weekly cabinet meeting. Measures could range from a national lockdown to extension of Easter vacation, even the closing of schools, something the French had been able to avoid since last spring. Olivia Salazar-Winspear has more.
Here in Toulouse, they'd escaped the worst of the lockdown measures, but now cases of COVID-19 are on the rise, especially among teenagers and young people over the last 3 weeks. A trend that's also been observed in other parts of the country, but these high school students don't seem too concerned.
On est en présentiel distanciel un jour sur deux. Donc voilà, nous on se sent protégés.
Je me sens pas en danger, je connais personne de mon âge qui a eu des difficultés par rapport au Covid.
In the Greater Toulouse area, 179 classes have been sent home and 13 schools are currently closed. Parents are worried about students falling by the wayside and even dropping out.
La grosse inquiétude, ça va être les examens qui arrivent à la fin de l'année, comme le bac, et reste aussi les épreuves de philosophie et le français pour les premières.
For teachers, being able to work in safety is their priority.
En France, on a fait le choix de garder les écoles ouvertes, il faut effectivement s'en féliciter, mais on n'a pas fait ce qu'il fallait en protégeant les personnels enseignants, comme dans d'autres pays. Donc ça, on exige effectivement maintenant rapidement un calendrier vaccinal.
Teaching staff across the country should be eligible for vaccinations from mid-April onwards.
Yeah, and the latest numbers from France, not good. A new record for 2021 when it comes to intensive care units, more than 5,000 in ICUs. Italy beefing up its Easter weekend national lockdown. It was initially announced a few weeks back by the Prime Minister. For more, let's cross to correspondent Seema Gupta in Rome. Seema, there's going to be a 5-day quarantine for anyone returning from abroad. Why is that?
Well, essentially, you had the health minister, Roberto Speranza, making this decision, signing this decree, saying that all people from the EU who are coming into Italy, whether they are local residents returning or on visitors, they have to test before arriving. They have to have a 5-day quarantine, and then they will have to test again after those 5 days. Now, these quarantine measures have already been put in place for non-EU member countries. That quarantine period is longer, though. What's happened really is, some might say, lobby groups, really, even those representing local hotels here in Italy, were very frustrated with the fact that there was already in place this red zone mandate for the entire country over Easter, the Saturday, Sunday, and the Monday. And that essentially means people cannot travel to towns within their region. They have to stay within the region. And in any case, nobody can travel between regions. That has been in place across the country for some time now. And what that essentially means is that people cannot travel over Easter. But they can travel abroad, because although the authorities have discouraged that and have advised against foreign travel, it's not banned altogether. And so some tour operators have actually been cheering this as a loophole around the restrictions. And now they've effectively put in place this quarantine, hoping that that will deter people from taking that Easter vacation or short little break over those 3 days that have been put in place and over the period as a whole. Now, the hope is that, of course, that if they limit travel and limit movement, that will contain the spread of COVID-19 in Italy.
Yeah, so what you're describing when it comes to Italy domestically is sort of what we have right now here in France, with stiff fines if you travel outside of areas like Paris, which are under lockdown, effectively under lockdown measures. To other regions. We're getting wind of a scandal out of Sicily on that score.
Yes, indeed. I mean, you had the Sicilian health chief, Ruggero Razza, effectively resigning today, although he maintains his innocence. And what he's been placed is under investigation, and several members in his department and in his area have been placed under house arrest. And that's essentially because they have said to have altered COVID-19 figures that was sent to the national authorities. Every region in the country has to send these figures to the national authorities, and that determines whether a particular region falls under the so-called red zone or orange zone or yellow zone. That's the color-tiered system that we have here in Italy. The red zone, of course, being one that has the toughest restrictions. So if those figures are changed, that can have an impact on how each region is designated. Now, everything kicked off because they found a particular lab in Sicily, the Carabinieri or military police, found that a lab had falsified data in terms of the number of tests or perhaps the number of positive cases. And so that triggered an investigation. And what they found is that they carried out wiretaps, and they found Razza himself saying something to the effect of spread out a bit, literally, that's a quote, the information and the data over a period of days in terms of the number of deaths due to coronavirus in a particular town. So now Razza has said he's innocent, he's resigning simply to protect the regional administration. But this data and this information coming out does incriminate him a fair bit. The Carabinieri are saying that they're looking for additional evidence, but what they found is some 40 cases of alleged forgery since November 2020, in which they have altered perhaps tests, the number of positive cases and the number of deaths. So clearly this, of course, has an impact in terms of understanding how each region gets designated a red zone or an orange zone. That's not just determined by the number of cases, of course, it's also determined by the number of hospital beds that are available to deal with COVID-19 patients.
Yeah, because when COVID began a year ago and Italy was the worst hit, it wasn't Sicily and the south that were battered worst. It was the north, and particularly the Lombardy region.
Yes, it's still pretty much, very much concentrated around the north, but in terms of having the high number of cases, but we're seeing cases throughout the country. And that's why we're seeing this third wave again this time round, with Italians trying to deal with the new infections and also frustrations with the vaccination program not going as fast as it's supposed to. We know that today, for instance, Prime Minister Mario Draghi and his wife did receive the AstraZeneca vaccine, the first shot of the AstraZeneca vaccine, and he has pledged that by mid-April, the number of vaccinations being carried out will be increased threefold to at least 500,000 vaccinations per day in the country. At the moment, it stands at about 170,000 or so, and slowly increasing to about 243,000, but he hopes to have it to about 500,000 by mid-April.
Yeah, many thanks for that, Seema Gupta. Same story in Italy, France, and Germany, waiting for the numbers of those vaccinated to rise. In the meantime, well, there's more spot checks. In Germany, the interior minister saying that there are going to be more random controls in a 30-kilometer radius for those perhaps planning those Easter holiday trips that Seema was talking about. Horst Ziolf are talking about an intensification of checks for the next 8 to 14 days, particularly for those arriving from Poland, France, or Denmark. Germany, meanwhile, which has just announced that you will not be getting that AstraZeneca jab if you're under 60 in certain regions, particularly Berlin, Munich, and others. This because of a few cases of rare blood clots, 31 of which 9 have proved fatal. The announcement follows Canada on Monday suspending the AstraZeneca jab for under 55s, as is already the case here in France. Sporadic